So we are now live on the air from beautiful downtown Oakland, California, where the sun is always shining unless it's not. And it's been a beautiful day here today. The sun is out, it's warm, it's hot, it's miserable, it's sweaty, but we don't care because it's not raining. So tonight we are going to talk about the concept of nafs. We've used this word a lot lately, and there seems to be a little bit of confusion because sometimes we'll talk about nafs, sometimes we'll talk about ruh, and both of these words can be translated to the same word in English, or the same words, and yet they are very, very different concepts. So, to make a basic distinction within the schematic that I use, ruh is of the spirit, nafs is of the body. And that is, it's a very different sort of equation when you get the I'm also bringing up more notes here. I realize I have many, many notes. So let's talk about what we mean when we say nafs. And usually there's a prefix to it. And in most cases, we're talking about the Nafs al Ammara, Nafs al Ammara, Nafs al Ammara. Got to get my things right here. And that means the commanding self. In a lot of the literature, it is often translated as the self that commands you to evil or the self that commands you to sin. But this is not correct. Unfortunately, over the last few hundred years, there's been a whole lot of theology has slid its way into this, and it needs to be removed again in order to understand what is actually going on here. So in one sense, it is absolutely correct in that the commanding self commands you to sin. The question is, what is sin? What do I mean when I say sin? What do you mean when you say sin? If you are stuck in external religion, sin is a list of do's and don'ts that you're supposed to follow that may have no rational connection to anything in the world. Like it is a sin, according to the Torah, to wear two different materials in the same cloth. So if you spin linen and wool together and you weave a cloth and make a shirt out of this material, this is a sin and an abomination before the Lord. That makes no sense at all. You know, why is the creator of the universe worried about what kind of clothes you wear? Yeah, so that's the thing. So there has to be a better description of sin, and that's where our starting point is. If the commanding self commands you to sin, what is the command that it gives you?
Mark offers missing the mark.
Missing the mark is the traditional Christian explanation of sin, and to me that doesn't really mean anything. What mark are you missing? What are you missing it with? All right, I'm going to read you guys an excerpt because the best description I have ever found of sin I got from a fantasy novel. This is a novel written by one Terry Pratchett. The book is titled Carpe Jugulum. And it starts with an old woman whose name is Granny Weatherwax, who happens to be a witch, and a priest, whose name, quite unfortunately, is the quite reverend, mightily praiseworthy are ye who exalt us Om Oates. And they're sitting on a roadside having a conversation. The conversation starts on the classic subject of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. 16, Granny says. You've counted 16, says Oates eventually. No, but that's as good an answer as any you'll get. And that's what you holy men discuss, is it? Not usually. There's a very interesting debate raging at the moment on the nature of sin, for example. And what do they think? Against it, are they? It's not that simple. It's not as simple as that. It's not black and white. It's not a black and white issue. There are so many shades of gray. Nope. Pardon? There are no grays, only white that's gotten grubby. I'm surprised that you don't know that. And sin, young man, is where you treat people as things, including yourself. That's what sin is. It's a lot more complicated than that. No, it ain't. When people say things like they are a lot more complicated than that, that means they are getting worried that they won't like the truth. People as things, that's where it starts. Oh, I'm sure that there are worse crimes, but they starts with thinking about people as things. And that, my friends, is the best definition of sin I have ever run across. And that is what the commanding self does. It does not see inwardness. It only sees object. It does not experience subject. And so when somebody is lost completely in the commanding self, they are just responding to their own internal stimulus response mechanism. Does that make sense? That last was not a rhetorical question. I'm sending out a ping to see where you guys are. You've heard me talk about this before, some of you.
Umar says it sounds like Kant.
Actually, Kant sounds like Pratchett, not the other way around, even though Kant came first. So, my argument is that the commanding self experiences the world as object. Some of the objects that it experiences, it identifies with. We just lost somebody. We seem to be having some trouble with connections tonight. And hopefully they will get back in here or not. Hopefully. I think Nancy is still here. That was Dave. Dave, we lost. No, Dave's here. Ahmed is here.
Twice.
Yeah, who knows? So, the Nafs al Ammara, the commanding self, is entirely mechanical in nature. If we were Gurdjieffians, we would say it operates at the level of 96 laws. And it represents the 9 fixations of the Enneagram. It's narcissistic, it's mechanical, it's purely conditioned. And it is where more and more people live most of the time. Now understand, Nafs is of the body. It is the personality or the persona that is created by your nervous system, by your musculature, by the experiences that you pattern into your body throughout your life. And those of you who have done body work or who have had really good body work done on you know that sometimes somebody will push on someplace and memories will come up, emotions will come up, whole things will be connected to that place in your body. And the commanding self has one purpose, and that is to keep you alive at all costs. It will hijack your nervous system to do this if it thinks you are in danger. Now, you can go through your entire life at this point and have a decent life. This does not make you a bad person. This does not make you evil. This is where most people are most of the time. And you can tell oftentimes when people are at this particular state because they will be, if you are at all awake, they will be completely predictable. You will know how they will respond to any given stimulus, and there will be no surprises with them. This is one of the worst things about being awake, is that it is very difficult for people to surprise you when you're in an awake state. So, some people, for various reasons, will find somehow the necessity to work on themselves. And when this happens, in the beginning, it is also mechanical. Everybody who started the work started because of mechanical influences and impulses, not because of angels coming down and saying, yeah, it's time for you to wake up. And sometimes they are completely accidental, and sometimes they are orchestrated. And that's a whole talk in and of itself, because some people have the ability to jar a person's programming in such a way that they start wondering if they're awake or if they're asleep. So, if that happens and the person finds some way to work on themselves, the right books, the right teachers, the right experiences, they will begin to transform their nafs, their persona. Now, I should mention that at the level of the Nafs al Ammara, and I used level for lack of any better term, unfortunately, the persona is completely asleep. And essence is identified with the sleep of the persona. And by sleep, I mean completely stimulus response, completely mechanical. And essence is just watching the movie with no will, no intention. And when you work with people, this becomes very, very evident. Working to get people to do, to stop doing destructive things that they are addicted to. And no matter what you do, given the slightest stimulus, they're back to their addiction. It's very much like that. But if conditions are right, you can begin waking the machine up. The persona can begin to experience moments of lucidity. And when it does, it will move from the commanding self to the blaming self, what's called Nafs al Ammara. The blaming self is basically developing a conscience. And when you begin to move from the stage of commanding to blaming, you begin to develop this voice inside your head that says, you know, the way you just acted was really lame. Or do you realize that you just hurt that person? Or, you know, you're really not being all that authentic right now. This sort of voice. This is the blaming self. This is actually a higher state than the commanding self. And so the blaming self develops conscience. And as you develop a conscience, you move from 96 laws to 48 laws. Now, allow me to suggest that this is the parable of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, before they ate the fruit, they were existing at the level of 96 laws. They had no conscience. They were not fully human. And it was not until they ate the fruit of the tree, and it wasn't the fruit of the tree of life, it was the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What that means is the ability to discern the other as subject and to develop, at least in its infant stages, empathy. This is what the commanding self doesn't have and what the blaming self starts developing. One of the important things about the blaming self is when you get there, you begin to develop the capacity for self-observation. And I mean that as the practice that we talk about. You actually begin to have enough awakeness to observe your own behavior and your own expressions in the world and to comment to yourself on them. And from the point of the Enneagram, you move from the head fixations to the heart passions. Because you can then begin to work with that deeper level that is underneath the fixation. So far makes sense as the model goes? So after spending enough work there, you will hopefully get to the third level of the self. This is called Nafs al Ammara, the inspired self. At this level, you have developed true empathy. Your conscience has taken you to the place where you can experience the feelings of others. You have moved into 24 laws from 48, and 24 laws is where you truly become a human being. You develop the capacity for self-remembering, but You lack discrimination. You like mystical states a little bit too much. The trouble with the ego at this point is it can be distracted by lots and lots of different shiny things. And people who hit this state will often go guru hopping. So, questions so far? Any thoughts? Come on, Elmar, you must have some question.
Trying to unmute myself. So, is this process of moving from your commanding self to the blaming self to the inspired self, is this a mechanical evolutionary process?
Yes, this is all a process of evolution of the machine,
Okay.
of the stimulus response mechanism, of the persona that is in the body. Other things go on at the same time because you're actually strengthening this in a really interesting way, not in the way that you think of your ego as usually being strengthened, but as you clean stuff up, as you become less and less mechanical, your energy becomes stronger. You have more energy to use for the work.
But that still sounds like there's a subject that's doing the energizing and so forth, rather than a mechanical evolutionary process.
Well, there must be a subject somewhere.
Yeah.
But as I said at the point of the commanding self, the subject, the essence, is identified with the machine.
Okay.
In each of these stages of the process, the subject, the essence, becomes less identified with the machine as the machine, and I just use that as a term for the persona. As the persona becomes less asleep and less mechanical, the essence can separate itself from the persona. It can begin to see the persona as not itself, but as also an object given to it to witness.
And does it then somehow intervene in the process?
It doesn't intervene.
It?
It doesn't intervene. It encourages.
Okay. Give me an example of that, because I'm kind of torn between, on the one hand, this picture of a more or less mechanical evolutionary process, and on the other hand, this picture of an essence which is gradually waking up and beginning to act. And I imagine maybe both of those are incorrect. So
both of those are both correct and not exactly it.
Yeah.
But yes, as the essence wakes up, and for lack of a better term, you get more ability to actually do things. You get choice as opposed to purely acting mechanically. So I think of it as it's almost as if there is this conversation that goes on between essence and persona, where the persona goes, "Hey, I'm terrified of doing this." And the essence goes, "Yes, I know you're terrified, but it's going to be okay. Let's do this anyway."
Mm-hmm. And those are not just two equivalent voices, but one is like the senior essence and the other one is the persona, which is essentially blocking the way. Is that?
The persona may or may not be blocking the way. The persona's job is to keep the body alive. So, and unfortunately, if it has not been well trained, it might have some crazy ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm. And so the cultural context in which this happens works, is that one of the evolutionary driving forces that works to keep this mechanical evolution going? In other words, if I let's say if I grow up in the middle of this enlightened library and start, and my little toddler persona starts rummaging through the books, and that induces a certain growth pattern. That's presumably.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I don't think you're going to ever learn this from books. If you grew up in a monastery of awakened human beings, maybe, but there is no guarantee. There is definitely no one thing that you could say, if this happens, then you will become an awakened human being.
But nevertheless, the part of what's driving that evolutionary process, the mechanical evolutionary process, is presumably the social context within which it's happened, right? Which presumably
no, I don't think so. I think that is the least part of it. I think that actually the social context that you live with attempts to circumvent the evolutionary process. The social context that we live in want us to just stay in the mechanical self. They want us to just stay in the commanding self.
So then what is the evolutionary force that's pushing this in the direction of commanding, to blaming, to inspiring? I mean, in a normal evolutionary process,
that's
we
a
talk
good
about
question.
survival,
I can give you some answers to it, but at this point, that is getting off in a slight digression.
Okay. I'll save that question for some other time.
Save the question, because it's a good question and it's one that needs to be discussed. But we don't have time in the next half hour to cover it.
I'll take that. Continue on.
All right.
I've got one.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay, it may be that I'm just too used to people who are doing the blaming thing, but I was wondering about the teacher's attitude to the person who's at the commanding phase, where they just keep slipping back and slipping back.
What teacher?
Excuse me?
What teacher?
You said that the people tend to have teachers. I mean, not always. So there you are, you're somebody's teacher, they're addicted to whatever destructive behaviors, and they keep going back to those behaviors even if they slip out a tiny bit. As a teacher,
okay.
how do you deal with this?
Okay, so I'm going to speak for me.
Sure.
I cannot speak for teachers. I can only speak for myself, because different teachers are going to do this different ways. And Kyle might want to speak to this at some point as well.
Sure.
So when I run across somebody like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I determine that they do not have an interest in actually waking up, I have two tracks that I work with people on. One is remedial, one is generative. And I shift that person to the remedial track, because what they're telling me is that right now in their life, what they want to have is good dreams, not to be awake. And so I help them have the best possible dreams in their sleep. I have no moral necessity to force anyone to be awake.
Okay.
People want to have good dreams and have a really well-functioning commanding self that doesn't make them miserable. I'm all for that. And so that's what I do with somebody like that. If they cannot do the work, then they need to do the remedial work. And maybe after they've done the remedial work, they can do the real work. Maybe not. But as a teacher, it is toxic for me to want my students to wake up if they don't want to. So that's how I deal with that.
Okay, but even somebody who's going to be doing better is going to keep slipping back. Maybe not as much.
People do what they do as long as they continue progressing forward. I do not keep a score.
Okay.
Keeping score of, oh, you are backsliding here, you are moving forward there. No, that's not worth anything.
Okay.
At least not the way I work. The way I work is okay, you're doing better. You've had these glitches. These glitches are the areas in which we work, and you're doing better, and you're continuing to do better, and you continue to do better. And the glitches are just things that happen along the way that are the material that allows you to have something to work, if that makes sense.
They do a good job of pointing out where things need to be worked on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're not failures. It's more like, as long as a person is motivated, they want to do things differently, even if they keep messing up. It's kind of like, if they're willing to be introspective and like, I know I keep doing this, but I'm trying to figure out why I'm doing it, and I really want it to be different. That can be motivating. It can be motivating to keep supporting that person.
Yeah, I encourage people to make different mistakes. Yeah. Don't make the same mistakes. You've already done those. Find new ones. Find more interesting ones.
Yeah.
So we look at the inspired self, and like I said, they like mystical states too much at this level.
Oh, I just wanted to touch on Ahmed's question real quick.
Yes, please do.
Ahmed says, can this happen without getting out of being third force blind? I mean, awakening the essence means being able to see the reconciling force instead of being prisoned in the polarities.
The first 3 steps can happen while you are still third force blind. The third step will cure that blindness, or begin to cure that blindness. That's my experience anyway.
So like
opinions may vary. Yeah. Say again?
So like once you're there already, you mean? That's when it starts picking up?
Yeah, when you get to that third level of Nafs, when you get to the inspired self, you begin really perceiving the third force. At the commanding self and at the blaming self, you can't experience the third force to any significant extent, I don't think.
Right. Okay. So I guess we're ready to continue then if no one has any questions.
Good.
That was helpful, Ahmed.
Yeah, these are all really good questions, though. Even the ones I can't answer. Probably especially the ones I can't answer. So, Nafs al Ammara, the secure self. At this point, you actually begin to develop real loyalty and real sincerity, and you go from empathy to compassion. And that's a big step. There's a difference between compassion and empathy. At this level, you are really dedicated to your own work. And you are, when I say loyalty, this doesn't mean like you're going to swear fealty to the king, right? This is not that. This is, you are connected. You are part of the tradition of the school, and you are dedicated to that, not to any person. So at this level, you develop a capacity for self-witnessing. And the problems that arise is that you become spiritually ambitious. These are the guys who want to be teachers themselves, who imagine themselves as the guru with followers, who want to be seen as enlightened. This was Ibn al-Arabi's trap. He had to struggle with this in the worst possible way in his life. And he doesn't come right out and say it, but you can see it in his writings when he's talking about his experiences. So if you work really, really hard, and this puts you under the dominion of the 12 laws, which is like, this is very high state. Once you graduate from this, you get to what's known as the contented self, or Nafs al Ammara. At this level, you develop endurance and the ability to experience conscious suffering. If you don't know what I mean by conscious suffering, go back and listen to the talk that I did on it. It's actually pretty good. It explains it, I think, fairly well. And this puts you at the level of 6 laws. What you get here is the capacity to enter, I use the term samyama, the great practice, which is the ability to combine the self-witnessing, the self-remembering, and the self-observation together into a flow state. The trap at this level is you tend to identify with your spiritual states. You know, I am my awakeness, or I am Joe's awakeness. After you have worked a bunch there and really gotten set into that, you get to what we call the gratified self. And gratitude is a very important thing. And this is why this is called the gratified self. Nafs al Ammara, the gratified self. At this level, you experience real faith and real surrender. And those two things in themselves are several hours worth of conversation. You develop the capacity to have true will, to really exert your will in the world. And your trap is spiritual intoxication, because touching this particular state of being is kind of ecstatic if you're not careful. I mean, Rumi hit this state and he composed the Divani Shamsi Tabriz, and then he composed the Masnavi, right? So you get the really ecstatic states, and they can be very compelling.
Ahmed asks, at which stage might the spiritual bypassing happen?
The spiritual bypassing can happen at any of the first 4 states. You do not get a whole lot of spiritual bypassing at the rest of them. Mostly in the first and second state. Yeah, basic rule is never assume that you're enlightened, whatever that is.
Ahmed asks, how can we avoid spiritual bypassing?
Helps to have a good teacher. There's an old Sufi saying, he who does not have a sheikh has shaitan for a sheikh. There is a certain amount of truth to this. I mean, some people can have, a khidr come down and teach them, but most people don't. Most people think that they can go like Uwais al-Qarani, the famous dervish who never met Muhammad and yet was completely devoted to him. And they can't. So, first thing, find a mentor who you can trust, who will tell you when you are bullshitting yourself, and whose ego is not involved in being a teacher. That's the other part. That's the hard part. Mm-hmm. Because I can tell you, all of us like to be seen as, oh, hey, he's the smart guy. He has the answers. Yeah, but that's poison. Don't drink that stuff. Do not drink the glowing green liquid. You will regret it. Does that make sense, Ahmed? Well, think about it. Let me know if it does make sense or not. Now we get to the last bit.
I need a question. How can I know that this specific sheikh or mentor is mine? I mean, people might get confused because what I know is everyone has a specific sheikh that is meant for him, or
Yes.
he's
This is the
searching for the
hardest
right guy.
question of all. And yes, there is one sheikh that is meant for you, and there are a number of sheikhs that are meant for you. You get to have more than one teacher, though there will be one who is primary, and that teacher might send you to others. There are ways to recognize the teacher. And again, I'm going to have to put you off on the details of this because this is another hour or two of discussion just on this, but you are inspiring me to do an hour on how do you know that your teacher is your teacher? And I can tell you a few things. One, when you are with this person, they speak the truth that is in your heart. Two, they do not point at themselves. Three, when you are with them, you tend to feel better because they take up your burden a little bit for you. And there are a whole bunch of others, but those three to me are some of the most important. And your teacher will know if you belong to them. That's the other thing. Hang out with somebody for a while and see how they treat people who come to them. If they accept everybody, then you may have to do some thought. I remember my teacher, any number of times somebody comes and he says, I'm sorry you're not one of mine. You can stay with us for as long as you need to. You can be part of our circle until you find your teacher. I will take care of you. I will protect you. I will guide you as best I can, but I am not your teacher. I will just hold his place until you find him. Real teachers do that. And when I saw that, the first time I saw that, I was flabbergasted because I was so used to American gurus who will take anybody who has the money. They think that it is the quantity of followers that you have that shows that you know what you're doing, as opposed to the quality of your students.
And so what is it that creates the match between a particular teacher and a particular student?
I think God arranges it. To be absolutely frank, that is the best answer that I have. There are some things. Kyle, can you speak to that?
I'm sorry, Ilmar, what was the question?
I was wondering, what is it that creates that match between a particular teacher and a particular student?
I mean, in my experience, I had teachers that I felt like I just didn't really, I respected them a lot and I wanted to know what they knew. But it was kind of like when you make friends, you're like, wow, I really connect with this person. I really hit it off with this person. And at least for me, I was looking for someone who was easy to talk to, who would not be judgmental, and who was patient. Those were criteria that I was looking for.
And unfortunately, she found me.
Yeah, so, but I've had other teachers who, like I said, I respected, but I didn't stick it out with them because I felt like it was like going on an awkward date, kind of. It was just not the right fit.
Yeah. So it sounds like partly it's a sense of connection, partly it's whatever fits your particular needs, your particular rough spots that need to be ground, or what.
I mean,
Yeah, the sense of connection is incredibly important to me. When I look for people who I can work with, that's the first thing I look at is, can we connect on the level that I need to connect with them on?
Yeah. Yeah, that would seem to be almost like a universal requirement between
Yeah.
any teacher and student.
Yeah.
This stuff seems to be, what does a particular student need at this time? Like where are the rough spots that need to be polished? And what teacher is good at polishing those kind of rough spots in the
Yeah.
yeah. And it might not be so obvious in the sense of like, wow, I love hanging out with this person. Sometimes it's just like this person has or gives me the kind of support that I need. And that might look like having someone call you out on your shit constantly.
Mm-hmm.
But if that feels productive, if that feels right, that's the key. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ahmed, I don't know if that helped you at all. If the student and the teacher meet, who should take the initiative to say that you are meant for me? The student. The student must take the initiative. The teacher cannot go, you need to study with me. Any teacher who does that, you need to look twice at.
Even if the teacher knows that he's the one, I mean,
yeah, especially if the teacher knows that. So, Kyle, did I ever tell you that you should be my student?
Nope.
In all the years that we worked together, I never told her that she should be my student.
No.
Because if I am in the position of the teacher, that means that I have influence. And if I have influence and I use it to get somebody to be my student, then I have misappropriated them. It absolutely must be initiated by the student.
I mean, because literally one day, we chatted anyway, and then one day I was like, hey, I want to be your student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, it's about time.
But I didn't even know that because he was just like, he didn't try to proselytize at me or anything weird like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
At which stage or state the student might be able to separate from his teacher or to be alone, or does this never happen? Or
in one sense, it never happens, and in another sense, it always happens.
Yep.
There is no time when I am separate from my teacher. There is no time when I am separate from my sheikh or his sheikh or his sheikh. At all times, I feel that connection along that chain that goes from me to the beginning. I live with that. And at the same time, I have not been in the same physical space with my teacher now for 10 years. And I may not see him again in this life, but we are always connected. And sometimes we'll talk on the phone. So this is, as a student, this is not something that you need to worry about. When the time comes, you will know. When the time comes, your teacher will know. If your teacher doesn't know, he's not the right teacher. And your teacher is able to let go of you as a student, which is weird. I mean, there came a point where Kyle stopped being my student. And she is not my student now, nor will she ever be my student again. She has grown beyond that. And yet, I would say that we are probably as connected as two people can be.
Yep.
but it's now it's a different relationship. There is always a little bit of a hierarchy between teacher and student, and there cannot be a hierarchy when you have graduated your student and made them your deputy, made them your khalifa, given them their papers that say you have reached the point where you can do this now.
I mean, sometimes I ask for mentorship.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's kind of like initiated. He can't tell me what to do at this point.
Yeah. I can't tell her what to do. And sometimes she will mentor me.
Yeah, this is true too.
Yeah, it goes both ways. It is a horizontal relationship, not a vertical one.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Mark, who's sitting there all quiet and everything. Mark and I have a very horizontal relationship. Mark is a teacher in his own right. He does not need to be subject to a guru. That would be anathema to his process. So do feel free to chime in on this as well, Mark.
Yes, I spent a lot of time in Mushtaq's company before I said to him, probably 3 years.
Yeah, thereabouts.
Before I said, I want to have one-on-one time with you. And it just had happened as Kyle described it. I didn't think about it in advance. It was just one of those moments where it all came to clarity and resonated. And from that point on, there was a lot of movement between us in our conversations and in our exchanges. And yeah, it continues for sure.
Yeah. And it's different because, and I can tell you that this from personal experience of working with Mark, working with Kyle, working with a couple of other people, it is not me teaching them anymore. When we work together, we are creating the teaching together, and both of us benefit from it. Every time I work with Mark, I learn something. Every time I work with Kyle, I learn something. And that is a major difference.
It's another interesting aspect is that while I really was interested in the Sufi tradition and studied and learned, through some of the writers of the Sufi way, it wasn't until Mushtaq and I started really having serious ongoing conversations where I started to recognize what I'm learning from the language of the Sufi path was something I already know, but I didn't have those words for it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find also interesting is that, there's the sense of many roads, one journey. My background is more mystic Christianity and some Taoism, and I had a teacher of shamanic teachings when I lived in Boston. And it's interesting, the convergence of all those teachers.
Yeah.
Coming together with a universal message and a universal kind of process or sense of the movement like you described tonight. As you were describing all that, I was just like, yeah, there it is. Yep. That's what I know, but I couldn't have described it in that manner to any of you. I would have done it in my own words, which is what I do with people I work with.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the best way for, on a certain level, because then it allows you to shape the dialogue in a way that makes sense to the context you're working within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I think teachers are trying to help students find their way on the way.
Right.
Yeah. So let me give you the last stage.
I was just about to say, so before we lose, this
Yeah.
has been an excellent conversation, and I'm so glad that we touched on these things. But
Yeah, me too.
just gotta
So
finish
the last stage is called Nafs al Ammara, which can be translated as the self at rest or the completed self. This is where the persona is completely awake. It is not asleep. It is not running on a bunch of programs. It is awake. It's paying attention. And because it is awake and paying attention, it's quiet. The Nafs al Ammara is noisy. It is asleep and it's having nightmares most of the time. It is completely mechanical. The Nafs al Ammara is completely awake, completely quiet, and not dreaming at all. This is the stage where you find itlaq, liberation, and you come under the one law. You have freedom from duality. This is the non-dual. This is the abiding non-dual state. And they say that there are no traps at this state. If I ever get to this state, I will tell you if I find any traps. But until I'm there, I will have to just tell you what other people say. So that is an outline of the 7 stages of working with the mechanical self to bring it from the state of sleep and nightmares to the state of awakening and being aware in the world, where the essence is no longer identified with the persona, yet can assist the persona in doing its job and can change the persona's drapery as necessary. So
I thought you were going to say change the persona of the diapers, but never mind.
no, that's down at the first level. Now, personas are designed, persona means mask, and it's designed to create an image so that you can operate in the world. When I move through the world, I move through a number of different personas, and I do it very consciously. I can be the persona of the old man walking down the street or sitting on the bus. I can be the persona of the incredibly pleasant person who is standing in the checkout line next to you. I can be any and all of these things and many, many more and not identify with any of them. I have some that I like better than others. So that's the outline of that. And I hope that that will cause you to think differently about the idea of nafs and ruh, thinking of last week's talk and this week's talk. And I am pretty sure that I am putting together a several-week course on specifically how to work with the commanding self, how to begin to move it up through these various levels of functioning, because I think that that's something that really needs to be stated clearly in the world. I mean, you can go and read books and they'll say, oh, chant this, say this name 100 times or whatever, and it doesn't do anything. But there are very specific processes that can initiate this process within you. And you don't need a specific teacher to do this, so I figure I can step in and say, hey, y'all, do this if you want. So, any last questions?
I guess I do have one curiosity. I mean,
Okay.
You have this outline of developing stages,
Mm-hmm.
and you also strongly emphasize the need for a teacher, and you
Mhm.
emphasize the need for the student to essentially ask to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
Can that happen at any of these stages, or does the command itself already
I
happen?
think it happens. I think it happens at one of the first 3 stages.
So there's enough sense even at those stages to recognize the need for a teacher.
Yeah.
And freedom to ask for that.
Yeah. By the time you get to the blaming self, you start realizing that, you know, you have not been honest with yourself your whole life sometimes. And you start going, how can I find the truth of these situations if I can't tell it to myself? And you start going, who can mirror the truth for me?
You know, and that itself, I guess, strikes me as a rather important, I guess, evolutionary push here. I mean, for that to be able to happen in something which, as you described it, is so very mechanical,
Yeah.
is rather surprising, and also
It really is, isn't it?
yeah, it is, you know.
Yeah. And yet, every one of you who are sitting here and listening to this, and the people who couldn't make it tonight, have all made that push.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a miracle. It's sort of like learning to talk. How odd is that?
It's either a miracle, or there's some interesting mechanics built in, or there's not quite as mechanical as the picture first.
It's pretty mechanical. There are some interesting mechanics built in.
Okay.
And there are people who are acting at all times to nudge your mechanical nature.
There's all kinds of tantalizing topics that could branch out from that.
Yep.
I will leave you off the hook there.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've run out of time for tonight. So I am going to stop the recording, and thank you all for being here. And hopefully we will see you all next week.